Good morning, dealers. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. My name is Haley Holland, and I'm the Marketing Program Manager here at DealerSpike. I'm very excited to be joined once again today by Fran O'Hagan, CEO of Pied Piper, who will be talking to us about the best ways to respond to website customers and best online practices. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to pull out a control panel. So you should see in the top right corner of your screen. You can click on the orange arrow at any time to maximize or minimize the screen. And there's a question section where you can submit any questions you might have. So today, Fran will be reviewing many ways dealers are responding to website customers, reviewing his 2020 ILES scores, and how we can practice best online customer outreach. How can dealers apply these practices in their dealership, and how can we make them habit? With the primary goal to help you guys accelerate your results. So as I mentioned, my name is Haley Holland, Marketing Program Manager here at DealerSpike. I've worked with dealerships and manufacturers to develop business and marketing plans to accelerate online results and in turn yield a higher ROI. With that said, I'd very much like to take the opportunity to introduce you to Fran O'Hagan.
Hey,
so Fran O'Hagan, oh, hi Fran, sorry. Fran O'Hagan, CEO at Pied Piper, founded in 2003 in the sunny state of California. Pied Piper helps dealerships and manufacturers improve the performance of their retail networks. Their objective is to get higher retail sales, higher market shares, higher profitability, and higher customer loyalty. Fran, I'm so excited to have you back today to speak with our dealers.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Fran, some of our dealers tuning in today may have joined our last webinar, but for those that aren't familiar with Pied Piper, would you mind telling us a little more about your company?
Sure. So many of you will already be familiar with Pied Piper because of our PSI reports, Prospect Satisfaction Index. Those reports are often provided by manufacturers to their dealers to measure and improve how the dealership sales team sells, either for selling in person or selling digitally. And we also use PSI to prepare annual industry studies where we answer the question, how does the performance of each brand compare? In other words, the dealers who sell a certain brand, how do they compare to the dealers who sell a different brand? And that's what we released this week. We released the 2020 UTV and motorcycle Internet Lead Effectiveness Industry Study. So Internet Lead Effectiveness, or ILE, what does it measure? It answers the question, what happens when a customer visits a dealer website and inquires about a vehicle? What happens next? Does the dealership reply? And if they do reply, how quickly and how effectively? The industry study independently measured a sample of dealerships from 32 different brands that sell either UTVs or motorcycles. In total, we measured 6,012 different dealerships for this study. It was completed between July of last year and February of this year. And importantly, it was completed before the coronavirus pandemic began.
Wow, that's awesome.
So I had to show you this cartoon. Digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. And also I wanted to draw your attention to this quote on the left-hand side of the page from the Wall Street Journal about a month ago. The new coronavirus pandemic is deepening a national digital divide, amplifying gains for businesses that cater to customers online, while businesses reliant on more traditional models fight for survival. So what does all of this mean? What does all of this coronavirus ruckus mean for us? Well, if dealer web response was really important going into this, it is even more critical now And I can tell you that right now, your customers are coming to your website looking to buy products. I have proof of that, and I'm going to share it with you. So we have a graph here, but let's read the headline first. Dealership front doors may be closed. Hopefully, a lot of them are starting to open, but websites are open. Powersports, outdoor power equipment, and ag customers are active online right now. Now, I want you to look at this chart. The light blue graph or light blue line, that's last year. That's 2019, starting in January, running through, a week ago. The dark blue line, that's this year. So you can see that we were having a pretty good year, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out when we hit mid-March. But look at what has happened since then. Your customers started contacting your dealership website, first of all, about the same as last year, but look at where it is now. And this is from a week ago. So, I'm a glasses half full kind of guy. And if you would have asked me 6 weeks ago, hey, do you think these customers locked up in their houses, do you think they're going to still want to buy motorcycles and UTVs? I would have said, yeah, I think they will. That's exactly what is happening. And, this is for power sports, but when we look at the similar data for ag, for example, I hear from the ag brands that last month rather, was a great month for them. So the customers are active right now.
Wow, Fran, those are incredible and surprising results. It's amazing to see that online traffic has not stopped, but instead it's actually increased. So Fran, can you help our dealers understand how Pied Piper's ILE score is calculated and what does it mean for a dealership?
Sure. So 20 different measurements, that's what generates the ILE score. And the score is very simple. It ranges from a 0 to a 100. 0 would be terrible, 100 would be perfect. And now let's consider how dealers do nationally. So if you're a dealer selling UTVs or motorcycles, 13% of the dealers nationally score 70 or higher. Now that 70 number, we're going to come back to. That's an important number. And I want you to look down at the next yellow bullet that says 36% of dealers nationally score below 30. So 13% are above 70, 36% are below 30. The 13% scoring above 70, they're really doing a lot of things right. They're quickly, personally replying to their customers. The dealers who are scoring below 30, on the other hand, they're doing nothing. If you're a customer and you reach out to one of them, and you have to figure this is 4 in 10 nationally. So 4 in 10 UTV and motorcycle customers who reach out to dealers through the website, what do they get back in 24 hours? Nothing. They get no personal response at all. The best brand for having dealers who score 70 or higher is Harley-Davidson. About a third of their dealers are nailing it. They're doing really well with this part of the business. Whereas the dealers scoring below 30, the best brand, in other words, the brand with the fewest dealers scoring below 30 is Indian Motorcycle. I want to draw your attention to the last line on this slide, which is probably the most important line in the whole deck. Moving a dealer from scoring below 30, or in other words, we said he's doing nothing to reply personally to the customer, to scoring 70 plus, where you're doing a lot of things to reply quickly. So if you go from below 30 to more than 70, it generates 44% more retails on average from the same quantity of customer web inquiries. You're selling 40 to 50% more units to the same number of customers coming to your website, just from moving from doing basically nothing, which 4 in 10 dealers today do, to doing quite a lot, which we're going to talk about in a moment.
Wow, Fran, ILE does tell us a lot about how dealerships handle their leads. But can you tell us if there's even more room for growth?
Without question, there's plenty of room for growth. So let's talk first about what we have seen, what the change has been over the last year. Excuse me. So the first point is there has been widespread improvement. The average ILE score this year was a 42. Last year was a 33. Now let's stop and think about this for a moment. We're talking about a 42 out of 100. If your kids came home with a report card where they got a 42, you would say, you know, you need to work harder. And the same is true here. A 42 is not a great score, but it is a lot better than a 33. The next one, more use of dealer text messages. A year ago for the industry, it almost didn't exist. But now when customers reach out to a dealer about a UTV or a motorcycle, 19% of the time they will get a text back from the dealer. But I'm going to tell you that the auto industry today, that happens almost half the time. And we're going to talk about texting more in a moment. More emailed answers to questions. So right now, a customer who contacts a dealer through the website can expect to get an emailed answer back 43% of the time. A year before, that was only 33. More personal emails sent quickly, and by quickly I mean within an hour. That happens now about a third of the time. A year ago it was 21%. Also fewer very poor scores. It's dropped off by 28%. But let's draw our attention to that last bullet. Even larger variety in performance by brand and dealer. What do I mean by that? Well, there are still a dozen UTV and motorcycle brands that are performing really poorly today. Their whole networks on average are performing poorly. But this year, for the first time ever, there are 2 brands that are scoring well over 50. Or in other words, there are 2 Powersports brands that are performing identically to the typical car brand.
Fran, that's really great to see that there has been some improvement, some growth in the industry as a whole. Fran, I'm really dying to know what brand came out on top and scored the highest score in 2020?
Well, Harley Davidson. So Harley Davidson finished first last year also. But to put the improvement in perspective, this year there are 6 brands that scored as highly as Harley Davidson did last year. And Harley Davidson pulled further ahead of the rest of the pack.
That's awesome. Fran, I'm sure dealers are really excited to see how each brand performed in the different categories you've prepared for us today. But I just want to take a quick moment. I see a ton of questions coming in from dealers, and that's awesome. Thank you so much. A popular question from dealers right now is asking if we're recording. Yes, we are recording. We'll be sending out a recording following the presentation. And for those of you that are looking around going, where is the questions box? If you want to pop open the orange arrow, that'll maximize the control panel. And friendly reminder, we're saving time at the end for your questions. All right, Fran, back to you.
Great. So this chart gives you an idea of how all of the brands compared. And let's just take a moment to look at a bunch of different things. So we see Harley Davidson and Indian. Indian's right behind Harley with scores in the mid 50s. And as I said, that would put them right in the middle of the car brands. This is the first time any Powersports brand has scored that highly. But you notice that there's a lot of variety. Look at the bottom of the page. I mean, we have brands down here scoring under 30. I also want to draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner. Do you see the graph that says 3-year performance? And I want you to notice the red line. So the red line is the Harley dealerships in 2008 or 2018, 2019, and 2020. And the black line there is the industry improvement. You can see that the entire Harley-Davidson network improved dramatically. So it is absolutely possible to improve a network dramatically and get the payoff with incremental web lead close rates sales. But the point I want to make to all of you listeners is The same applies with individual dealerships. This is absolutely something you can improve, and the payoff is sales. So I would like to share with you 3 measurements. They're going to be charts that look kind of like this. One is going to be, for each of these brands, how often do their dealers answer the question by email within 24 hours? That's the first one. The second one is, how often do these brands dealers phone the customer within 24 hours? And the third one will be, how often do these brands text the customer within 24 hours? So let's start with the first one, which is, do these dealers answer the question within 24 hours? So we see at the top of the list, the John Deere dealers, 60% of the time, they answer the question within 24 hours. And if you look all the way at the bottom of the list, we see that there's some brands that where the dealers answer the question less than 25% of the time. But I also want to draw your attention again to that 3-year performance, that small chart in the upper right-hand corner, and notice that red line, how it improved dramatically, which is just, again, proof that this is something that you can change on a dealer level. Let's move to the next one, which is, do the dealerships phone the customer? So this is something that the Harley-Davidson dealers have done very well for years. They've relied on phoning the customer, and maybe they wouldn't even bother emailing them. We're going to talk, when we get into some best practices in just a moment, about how important it is to do both. You can't just do one or just do the other. And now, if you look at the bottom of this chart, we see that there are, let's call it, a dozen brands that phone the customer less than 1 time in 5, less than 20% of the time. Let's now move on to the last of our charts, and that is texting. So this is the first year that we have published these results for the study. It's something that we've been measuring on an industry level for several years. This is the first time that it really has blown up. We see that the Harley-Davidson dealers on average will text the customer 40% of the time. We see that there are a dozen brands down there that the dealers just don't text at all currently. And the question could be, well, how should I use emails, phone, and texting? And we're going to answer that when we get to best practices.
Thanks, Fran, for sharing those statistics and analytics with us.
So if we sum it all up, what's the bottom line about the study? Because we really want to get into the best practices. Well, the bottom line about the study shows that every power sports, outdoor power equipment, or ag brand still has plenty of room for improvement, the Harley-Davidson network included, because an ILE score of 70 plus is the target. We want all dealers hitting that 70 plus number. And speaking of the dealers nationally, how many of them are already doing it? 13% of them. Hopefully some of you listening right now are in that category. But we also know that roughly 4 in 10 of dealers selling UTVs and motorcycles today, they really do nothing at all to help customers who reach out to them today. So we're going to move on to best practices, but if you are interested in these statistics and what we found in the study, and you want more information, what I'm going to tell you to do is just Google Pied Piper PSI, and when the website pops up, click on recent press, and you'll be able to see what some publications have written about the study, as well as the press release for the study. But now let's move on to best practices for you.
And I just want to reiterate, the data definitely speaks for itself, and it's extremely important to promptly reply to incoming leads, especially after seeing the data that Fran just shared with us. Knowing that, I want to dive in, and Fran, you mentioned we're going to talk about best practices today. What's your advice for how dealers can make best practices habit and work into their daily operations?
So I'm going to share five simple best practices. And to be fair, if the group of us on this call right now, if we snapped our fingers and got your dealerships to follow these 5 religiously, without exception, you would outperform about 80 or 85% of the other dealers who sell, UTVs or motorcycles or tractors or whatever it is that you sell. These are not complicated, and they are backed up by facts. So 5 of them. The first one is measure and track your process. You guys, you've heard the saying, if you measure it, it will change. And that is so true. So you may already be receiving ILE reports, once or twice a month. These are 9-page PDFs. They're emailed directly to dealers. Usually they're provided by the manufacturer. So the manufacturer arranges this. And that may be the case for you. If it isn't the case for you, you don't get one, you certainly could order your own online. You just go to piedpiperpsi.com. I want you to think of ILE reports very simply. I want you to think of them as a flashlight shining on what dealership customers are really experiencing right now. Sometimes in my presentations, I have a picture of a flashlight and a picture of a roach. We don't need to tell anybody that roaches are bad. We don't need to tell anybody what to do to get rid of roaches, but the flashlight shining on the roach and showing you that you have roaches, that is the value added. And it's the same with these ILE reports. They're showing you what's really happening. They track salesperson web response by email, so you can see how your dealership replied by email, but they also track by phone and by text. They also report whether the email actually answered the customer's question, or whether it was, the digital equivalent of a form letter, spam. They report whether the dealership's digital process, your website working with your CRM system, working with email, chat if you have chat. They report whether any of those things have invisibly broken without you knowing it. And in summary, and lastly, they reflect the customer's complete experience, 20 different measurements. So that is the first of the 5. Measure and track your process. Know what your process is, measure and track it. Number 2, automated email. So for probably 99% of the dealers listening to this presentation, you will benefit from having an autoresponder. There are some dealerships that are just so on top of their processes, they don't need one. But for almost all of them, you will benefit. However, what I'm going to tell you is make sure that only 1 is going out to your customers, not 2, not 3. You may find that you didn't know what was happening, but your website is sending out an autoresponder, your CRM system is sending out an autoresponder, and when you get the lead through the manufacturer sites, the manufacturer is sending out an autoresponder too. So from the customer's perspective, they've gotten 3 emails, none of which do anything to answer their question. So make sure that it's working correctly. Number 3, quick personal reply. Within 60 minutes, if it's possible, if the process works at your dealership to allow you to reply within 60 minutes, that is your target. But there are plenty of Powersports Ag OPE dealerships where that's just not reality. For you guys, I will tell you that quote right there. Don't go home at the end of the day with digital customers locked up in your dealership, any more so than you would go home at the end of the day with physical customers still wandering around your dealership. Before you leave for the day, send emails answering all customer questions. But I'm going to tell you that 18%, roughly 1 in 5 of your customers, they will never see your email. It's going to go into junk mail. And then the second part of that is as soon as you hit send on the email, that's when you pick up the phone and call them. But I'm going to tell you that 24% of the customers, they'll never speak with you and they'll never listen to your voicemail. So that 18% number and that 24% number, those are problems. That's a big chunk of your customers. So how do you get around that? And the answer is very simple. You always both email and call them. When you do both of them together, it has this great math problem solution. You all of a sudden will reach 95% of your customers if you religiously both email and phone them. And what I'm going to tell you for number 5, immediately text the customer if they don't answer the phone, if you don't speak with them. Ideally, you want to speak with them on the phone. That is absolutely the best way to communicate with a fellow human being. But if you don't speak with them on the phone, then text them. However, if you have an automated texting system, in other words, you're not using a cell phone to do it, you need to make sure that your website is obtaining customer permission. There's a very specific law that requires that. Now, if you're using your cell phone instead to text them, just 2 people texting each other, then the law doesn't apply. Lastly, for texting, I want to tell you that I want you to use it the same way that you use it with your friends, which is to say, it doesn't replace emails. Texts are brief, they're concise. I don't want any long paragraph, long text. And also, I will tell you, I suggest that you don't attach images or videos to the first text that you send the person, because it may not get through. We see instances where the multimedia texts get blocked. And then the last part is you want to use email, phone, and texting. None of them replace the other 2.
Excellent. Thank you, Fran. These are great practices our listeners can apply to see better results and close more sales. I have to ask, what else can our dealers be doing?
So we just went through 5, right? And we said, hey, if you follow these 5 religiously, you're going to outperform the vast majority of other dealers out there. But what if you already have all of those things handled? What if you're one of the dealerships that's already scoring 70 plus? I mean, we saw 13% of the dealers are already doing that. Well, what else can you focus on? Well, I've included half a dozen extras. And if you look at this page, you can see a bunch of math. You can see a bunch of percentages there. So the percentages are, hey, what percentage of the time do dealers do this right now? So let's start with the first one. Include the salesperson's direct email address. So, Fran@OhaganMotors.com, not web leads at something. So salesperson's direct email address. About 1 in 4 of the emails going out have the salesperson's direct email address. And of course, why? Well, because I may be using this email for the next 5 years as a customer. Include the dealership's telephone number. Include the dealership's physical address. Where are you located? Right now, that happens 73% of the time. It could easily be 100. And then the next one, invite customer to visit the dealership at a set time. Schedule an appointment. The auto industry certainly does that very well. And both Harley-Davidson and Indian, their networks have improved this part of the business dramatically. Of course, that's the objective. Post-coronavirus, we absolutely want the customer to come and visit us at the dealership. Next, why should the customer buy now versus in the future? So right now, that excuse, in other words, this is a model that's in short supply, or we have a special running right now, or whatever it is, that happens 7% of the time. Also, give the customer a reason why they should buy from your dealership. O'Hagan Motors. In other words, not just the product. They can buy the product from other dealerships too. Always list a price. And MSRP is fine. It doesn't have to be a deep discount if that's not your thing. But in the email, there must be a price. Us humans, price is the number 1 item we use to position the product for ourselves, to figure out, am I going to consider buying it or not? So you absolutely want to list a price in your email. And then the last one is, what's some additional information that you can provide about the vehicle that the customer's already interested in that just confirms that it's a great choice for them?
Excellent. Thank you, Fran.
So we went through 2 different parts of this presentation. We went through the 2020 industry study results. We saw some interesting things. We saw that the industry has improved dramatically, but we saw that there's still plenty of room for more improvement. we learned about that ILE score of 70 plus and the ILE score of under 30, and how right now only 13% of the dealers are scoring 70 plus, whereas about 4 in 10 are really doing nothing at all to reply to customers who try to contact them. We saw that the Harley-Davidson and Indian networks had pulled away from the rest of the industry. The whole industry improved, but they improved even more. And then we moved on to best practices. We talked about the 5 best practices. So if you can follow those 5, one is measure and track your process. You can use the ILE reports to do that. Is it actually happening the way that you think it should be happening? The second was make sure that your autoresponder is set up correctly and only one auto response is going out. The third was quickly email an answer to the customer within 60 minutes. If there's a way to do that, reality may say, I can't do that at my dealership. And if that's the case, once a day is fine. Don't leave with digital customers locked up in your store. Email an answer to them. The moment you email that out, you need to call them. You always need to both email and call. And if you don't speak with them on the phone, you're going to text them. However, if it's automated, do make sure that you're getting permission from them to text before you text them. And then lastly, we went through half a dozen, let's call them extras that are additional best practices for you.
Wow, excellent. Thank you so much, Fran. Now, dealers, I want to open up for questions. And once again, dealers, you can maximize the control panel by clicking on the orange arrow and submitting your questions in the question section. And I see we've had quite a few come in. So Fran, the first question I've got for you is, how do I find out what our ILE score is? Where can I find that?
Gotcha. So if you are already getting ILE reports, you can log on to the Pied Piper's PSI web application, and you can see your current reports as well as your historical scores, and you also can access best practices to see how you're doing in each of these different measurements.
Another question for you, Fran. Are ILE reports available for other industries besides power sports and ag, such as boat or trailer manufacturers?
They are. So if you go to our website as a dealer, you are channeled into some specific industries. But if you contact us, contact Pied Piper directly, if you work for a manufacturer, for example, or you work for a large dealer group, we can get you set up with ILE evaluations for other industries too. We in most cases already do provide those evaluations for other industries.
Awesome. A great question from a dealer asking, what's the best practice for after-hour messaging to small businesses for customer email, messages, texting?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer that for chat because it's related. And that is, if you're going to set expectations, always make sure you can deliver with those expectations. So for example, if you offer chat and then you don't have anybody there to talk with the customer, that's much worse than not offering it to begin with. And it's the same thing. So if it's after hours, if it's midnight and the customer contacts your dealership and there really isn't anyone there to field their inquiry, then I would suggest that the response to them should acknowledge that and should say, we will call you back, or we will contact you back tomorrow.
Awesome. Another question for you. Is it okay if I text a reply without an email and call?
Yeah, interesting. So I would suggest that texting does not replace email, and it definitely doesn't replace calls. We lose about 70% of as humans, 70% of our communications capability when we're not speaking with someone, when we're relying on written language instead. So you absolutely want to talk with them on the phone. but I would tell you that it's simple to quickly send out an email reply to them. Some people consider texting to be a little bit personal. And if it's something that where you have already replied by email, you sort of get a pass on that.
Awesome. Fran, I have a dealer asking, is listing get a quote or call for price better than not listing a price at all?
A great question. The math says no. The math, and by the way, Dealer Spike is a great source for some of this math too. They have seen much the same things that we at Pied Piper have seen, where if you want to know a black and white answer, the black and white answer is always list a price. And as I said, MSRP is absolutely fine. You know, if you talk with anybody who's tried to sell anything on Craigslist or in Cycle Trader, you know, as a private party, you wouldn't dream of listing something with no price because, of course, nobody will call.
Excellent. Let's see. I've got a dealer asking, I'm the sales manager for my dealership and answer the incoming web leads. What's the window of time I should answer those leads in? I usually give myself 48 to 72 hours to respond.
Very good question. So we at Pied Piper try to follow the math. The math is very, very clear that you want to reply within 24 hours without exception. If you go beyond 24 hours, you are, tying both arms behind your back. And interestingly, you can look at web lead close rate by time to respond. And what it tells us is actually very interesting. It tells us that within 30 minutes is definitely better than longer than 30 minutes. But it tells us that if you reply in 10 minutes or in 20 minutes, it really doesn't make any difference. 30 minutes is the first measurement where it actually does make a difference. And then if you look at between 30 and 60, it drops off a little bit. Between 60 and 3 hours, it drops off a little bit. 3 hours and 24 hours, it drops off quite a lot. Beyond 24 hours, it goes down to it's almost the same as not replying at all.
Awesome. My agriculture dealership is very hesitant to list price online. Does it have to be a discounted, or does it have to be a price text? So like call for quote.
Gotcha. So, it's interesting. If we have a room full of 100 dealers and we discuss the idea of competing aggressively on price versus not competing aggressively on price, we'll have a very interesting conversation. There will be some dealerships that do compete very aggressively, and there's some that do not. And that same mentality transfers over to online. What the math tells us is that listing a price is important. And like I said, MSRP, so suggested retail price is absolutely fine as a place to start, because of course the customer is using that to say, I can afford that unit.
Awesome. Fran, I've got a two-part question here for you. Can you tell me different ways I can personalize text messages and email responses? And any recommendations for the best way to add text while not using a personal phone?
Gotcha. So the first one, we want it to be brief. You think about it, everybody who's listening, you all have friends who send you, or maybe they send your spouse paragraph long texts, and your eyes roll when you get them. That's just the way that it is. Texting isn't used that way. So the number one rule is absolutely keep it short and sweet. If the customer has asked a question, what I would suggest is answer the question and identify who you are and what dealership you're from, and that's it. Nothing more than that. And Haley, what was the second one?
Your recommendation for the best way to add text while not using a personal phone, phone number, yes. Sorry.
So now the law that is very specific about getting permission from customers to text, it's the TCPA law. and it says that you have to have written permission from the customer before you use an automated service, think of a computer, to text them. It does not apply if you use a cell phone. Of course, if at your dealership you use a cell phone, it means that you're not capturing the conversation into the CRM system. So ideally, you'd want to be able to have the text conversation captured in the CRM system. To do that, you need to make sure that your website is getting permission first. If you're a small dealership and maybe you don't even have a CRM system, you can absolutely use a personal cell phone to text.
Excellent. And then I do want to let you all know, because there are a few questions about, recommending a texting or a chat company. Reach out to your DealerSpike customer success representative. We might have some solutions for you. So if following the webinar, reach out to that person, reach out to your representative. I think they might have an answer for you. Fran, I've got a question about my dealership does a really good job with the basics, but what else could we do to improve on?
So that page with half a dozen extras, that's where I would start. So the simple answer, how can I increase sales by improving my web response, is to reply quickly with an answer to the customer's question. That is the secret sauce. That's the recipe. Once you have that handled, then you can work on fine-tuning the content. Fine-tune the content of your autoresponder, fine-tune the content of your replies.
Okay, and then for the last question we've got, Fran, it's about the autoresponder. So do you have any recommendations of a ideal auto response message we can set up through our website? Any recommendations on what our dealers should be doing?
Sure. So, I think of autoresponders as a print ad. So, those of you who create advertisements for your dealership, if you think back 15 or 20 years ago, pre-internet, or maybe you do it for a manufacturer, and you think about creating an ad for the newspaper or creating an ad for a magazine. So in that ad, you would want to be able to communicate why should a customer care? What is interesting about your dealership? What sets it apart from other dealerships? So think about it as a print ad for your dealership. In other words, customer, you've come to the right place. O'Hagan Motors is a wonderful family-owned operation. We've been around for 50 years. We have 3 master techs. We do off-road driving rides on the weekends, whatever it is. Confirm the customer's hope that they've come to the right place.
Awesome. And dealers, if we didn't get to your question, don't worry. We will make sure to reach out following the webinar to answer any of the questions that didn't get answered. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to tune in. And of course, thank you so much, Fran, for joining us again to speak with our dealers. It's so wonderful to hear some fresh ideas as to how we all can stay connected with our customers throughout these difficult times. And with that, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.